Hello, everyone. I'm Mike Koss, founder of KevAdvoTech, and thank you for joining today. I have a special guest, Dennis Farrar, I'm going to introduce in a minute. I'm going to let Dennis introduce himself further, but as many of you that follow us know, while we focus on special needs challenges and how technology can help assist special needs individuals and their caregivers, we do like to follow people in the business that inspire us and dedicate their lives and their careers towards serving special needs. So I happened to meet Dennis a few months ago on one of his Facebook groups that I joined. I think it's called How Special Needs Planning Works out on Facebook. And I started to follow Dennis, and he just contributes a ton to this community and helps guide some folks in similar situations as ours. And Dennis, again, I'm going to let him introduce himself. He is walking in the same shoes that many of us here are walking in, and he has a special needs son. So Dennis, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. I really appreciate the invite. So as Mike mentioned, my name is Dennis Farrar. My son, who is 28 now, his name is Tim. He has autism. Most people would call it high functioning. I think the industry calls it ASD level 1. What Tim has is a lot of OCD. He functions at probably, even though he's 28, probably at about a 13, 14 year old level. His mental capacity is fine for a lot of the things that he is very interested in, but he really isn't interested in a lot of other things that everybody else is interested in. And one of the things I'm most proud about my son is that he really has taken a liking to history. And in this case, specifically World War II Pacific Theater history.
Wow.
If you wanted to engage with him in a conversation about that, he can keep historians of naval ships busy for hours at a time. And he loves doing it. And I think that the other folks love doing it. So my family now lives in Charleston, South Carolina area. We just recently moved from St. Louis, and Charleston is essentially, as I love to call it, my pre-retirement location. So we're getting settled in, and we're just looking forward to the journey.
That's awesome, Dennis. Thank you. So is Tim full-time with you guys, living with you guys?
Yeah, Tim is my wife and I, we are his guardians, and he will always live with us. Absolutely. If let's just say he'll always live with his mom. He's a mama's boy, but I kind of tag along for the ride sometimes. But no, we have a very special relationship, and we play together a lot. So
it sounds like you're in a very similar scenario that my wife Ruth and I are in. You know, we have Kevin living with us full time, and he'll be with us as long as we're on this earth, or we can't manage things and care for Kevin as we age. So that's part of what I want to talk about a little bit later too, by the way, in this conversation, right? Because I think most of the people in our audience and in our similar situations, one of the things we worry about constantly, I know I get up every day going, I need to figure out this long-term living plan for Kevin when we can no longer provide for him. And it's quite overwhelming. All of this is quite overwhelming as you live your day-to-day life and try to do the best you can, and you got a lot of things coming at you, right, to manage family-wise, not to even mention, maintaining a career and feeding the family. So tell us a little bit about the the business side and what you do and how you help people. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the call here, I first met you by joining your Facebook group, How Special Needs Planning Works. And I see that you jump in numerous threads and talk about different things that we should all be thinking about in terms of special needs planning. Can you tell us a little bit about that? We'll jump into the detail here.
Certainly. Yeah, so as Mike mentioned, we all have to be aware and be ready for that moment when we as caregivers can no longer be that caregiver, right? And that day is coming for all of us. We don't know when, but that day is coming for all of us. And when my son was first born and he had the diagnosis of autism, I kind of figured that there was a group of doctors and professionals out there that could help us get through this, the parent portion of it. And obviously we've all found out that every person's journey is different. And so therefore I dedicated myself at the moment that I was told that there isn't a book. I dedicated myself to living the life of being a planner for my son's future. So I went to every doctor's appointment, every IEP. I went to every government planning session. I went to the advocate meetings. I went to everything that I could with Tim, and I've gained a lot of experience through doing that. And so then when I actually started doing financial, I'm a financial professional. I looked at it and I'm like, my gosh, I now have a position where I can be a valid team member on a special needs planning team. And let me kind of go through that, what that means, first of all.
Sure.
So a special needs plan has multiple sections to it. The first is what I like to call the life plan. And the life plan is basically your dreams and your vision for your child's future and their future care. So the life plan is basically a whole collection of just things that you would love, things that your child can do today, things that you hope your child can do in the future, and maybe even a little bit of a path on how to achieve that. So the next part of the special needs plan is what I call the resources plan. So we have the goals, the objectives, and the milestones and all those kinds of things set up in the life plan. Now it's, what is it going to take? What components, what pieces, what finances, what kinds of things is it going to take to provide your loved one with the best possible life and their best possible future. So that's the resources plan. Then there's a aspect of it called the financial plan. So now that we've gotten the first two pieces out of the way, what's it going to cost, right? And with that, what we have to do is we have to take a little bit of a calculation, right? We have to do a little bit of guesswork because the future is never given, but we take our current planning and we take our current costs and all these different things into consideration, and we kind of try and project it out for the future starting today, right? So we have to assume that the plan gets kicked into motion today, and we project that forward. So we come up with a budget or a cost estimate, and we turn that into the financial plan. So the financial plan isn't just what it costs, it's going to be what it's going to take to achieve that. And then a lot of times we got to look at it from a legal perspective. So the last portion of the pie is what I call the legal portion of the plan. And the legal portion is going to be things that, for instance, when your child is still in school, there's this thing called the IDEA Act. While you are still at the stage of between 17 and 18, you're probably going to contemplate whether a guardianship or something like supportive decision making or something like that is the right path for your child. And I love to help families develop their journey through that. And then we eventually get into things such as the estate planning and the special needs trusts and things like that. And that's all a part of the legal plan. And then there's always this little thing that I love to throw in there called the unique circumstances.
Sure.
Everybody has unique circumstances, and those are going to play a part in all four of those previous areas. So,
Okay, great. Now, out of curiosity too, that unique circumstances, I've seen that piece referred to as different things. Most recently, I was reading something about, is it similar to what others refer to as letter of intent? Is that similar, or am I missing?
no, that's a great question. So what winds up happening is that because everybody has unique circumstances, and because there's going to be a point where we can no longer be the primary caregivers, I think it's our duty as the primary caregivers today to document what the current scenario and the current situation is for our loved one, right? So the way we do that is through a pretty detailed document that I can help people go through called the letter of intent. It has the important people, the important medical aspects, the important treatments, the important routines, all the things that are that make your child you, or your loved one, who they are. Those kinds of things would get documented in the letter of intent so that the next generation of caregiver doesn't have to learn all these things on their own.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense, Dennis. And I guess, again, I'm kind of thinking out loud here. Is that something then that becomes part of the special needs trust, or is that part of the package, or what? I mean, how do you view this collection of documents and plans?
Right. So the letter of intent is not a legal document, but because it will be delivered as a part of the transfer of wealth and many other things, such as the successor guardianship. If you're the guardian, so there's a lot of things that get passed down. I have found that your attorney is the best person to actually contain the letter of intent along with the other legal documents. Again, it is not a legal document, but
Sure.
your attorney will be happy to provide that letter of intent down to the next generation of caregiver.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you. That makes sense. So let's talk a little bit back up throughout the process of building this life plan. Let's talk a little bit about the financial side, right? Many of us are challenged with that as our adult child turns into an adult after age 18, and that child is still living with you, as it is in both our cases, right? You can apply for things like SSI and SSDI. We don't need to get into that detail here, certainly, but how does that piece, or those pieces of financial things that can be available, how would you suggest to the folks that you work with, how do you supplement that, right? Because SSI, SSDI, and any government aid, frankly, at least in my view, doesn't cover everything that we would possibly want, right? Like I would want my son Kevin in the special needs trust to have part of our assets, right? Our financial assets, and that my oldest son, as the trustee, would be the one managing those finances. Could be life insurance policies, etc. I mean, how would you go about suggesting to someone you're working with, what does that whole financial plan look like? Can it be parts of government assistance, right? Like SSI coupled with other things you're doing financially? I mean, there are able accounts. I think we might talk a little bit about that. I know I have one I should have started a long time ago for my son, Kevin, but I did start an able account a couple of years ago and funding that. And that's a great vehicle as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of these pieces that can encompass your plan?
Sure. So the way I look at it, the financial plan has to take all of those things into consideration. So when we look at today, we're going to look at things like what is the primary caregiver providing for the disabled loved one, in this case, our children, and what does it cost to do that? And we have to basically go through a pretty detailed calculation, including prescription costs and costs to drive to therapies if we got to do that. There's just a whole big variety of costs that need to be taken into consideration. And the way I do it is I come up with a cost of care today. That's what I'm going to call the net present value, right? So I come up with a cost of care today. And then if your child is 23 years old, we basically want to associate a life expectancy. I think 80, 85 years old is probably pretty good to estimate that. So now we go ahead and we assume the net present value of the cost. We project that out a number of years. We incorporate a inflation aspect to it. So 5% generally is not a bad inflation aspect to associate with that. And then we just do the math. We put it forward. And then we have a number at the end. And then we start figuring out what pieces are already in place to cover that number. All right. And then we just, like, if SSI is a part of it and Medicare or Medicaid is a part of it, whichever or both of those that your child has, we know we have healthcare covered. So we just start peeling back the costs and we figure out, is there a shortfall? Or
yeah, where's the gap, right?
Are we ahead of the game? Are we behind? And if we're behind, then we start develop with your trusted financial person a plan to cover the gap. All right. And you had mentioned one that is actually extremely important because it can be somewhat, and I'll say somewhat, inexpensive to purchase on the front end, but it can provide a huge cost benefit on the back end, which is life insurance, right? And
Sure.
One of the biggest aspects of life insurance is that the death benefit is non-taxable. So when the death benefit goes into the special needs trust, there's not going to be any taxes associated with the death benefit. And that's pretty important too.
Sure. Now, it's, I'll tell you, I'll share with you fairly recently as I've reassessed some of our coverage and looked at new policies, for example, I didn't realize that there was something called a second to die type of policy, right? It sounds a little bit, it might sound a little bit morbid or whatever, but when you think about the detail behind it, I think it might make sense for me and Ruth, and may make sense for others too, right? Which is basically, as I said a little while ago, we're going to try to care for Kevin as long as we possibly can, right? As long as we're physically able to. And maybe, God has his own plan, right? But maybe we'll have Kevin with us until we do pass on and leave this earth. Well, a second to die policy, from what I understand, is just as it says, right? I let's say I pass first, and then my wife Ruth passes, and then after that, the policy would kick into place and be funded, right? It would pay out, and that would go into the special needs trust. And my oldest son, who's managing the finances at that point, will use that money to, provide for Kevin's care and the gaps that you mentioned. So I think there are some interesting options out there. I need to do a little more homework on these, but some of them make pretty good sense, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the aspect of the second to die. Some of them are called survivorship policies. And the reason that those are good, especially for two-parent families, is that you may come across, and I come across this a lot, life insurance is one of those things that it's available to those that are healthy, young, those
Sure.
kinds. It makes it a lot less expensive to do that. But one of the things that insurance companies have found out is that when insuring more than one life, that's why group term policies are a lot of times a lot less expensive than an individual policy. The more lives that you're able to insure, the lower the insurance cost is to the insurance provider. So therefore, they can provide a higher death benefit at a lower premium cost. So obviously everybody's policy is going to be unique to them, but you can even get policies that one of the persons in the survivorship policy is either, pretty not as well as the one
Sure.
person, and you have one very healthy person. It makes it easy to get a as you call it, the second to die or the survivorship policy. And it's also good because the intent of that policy is to take care of the our loved ones after we're gone. So we might have insurance on us to cover things like loss of income or mortgage or things like that for the family if something happens to us early. And then we might have this second to die policy sitting out there as well, so that it is the primary component that funds the special needs trust.
Yeah, the other key thing is, as you mentioned, and again, I'm thinking back on this myself, is I wish I had started looking at some of these policies too when we were a bit younger. I mean, Kevin had his accident 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago at the age of 15. We all know how life insurance policies like that work too. It would have been significantly cheaper or less costly for us if we had started that 15, 20 years ago. So yeah, I encourage anyone that's listening to this, if you are looking at and considering some sort of life insurance policy to fund your special needs trust and be part of your estate plan, it start early, right? As early as possible, as your child is growing up. And otherwise, when you get to be my age, as I'm going through the exercise here, the premiums are significantly higher. So it makes sense, right? I mean, that's how policies work.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, you got to look at it from the perspective of the insurance company as well as the perspective of us. So
Yep.
Everybody's circumstance is different. And, the way I look at it is you work with someone who is good at what they do and that you can trust, and you just, you go from there. You get the best you can do.
Sure. Now, aside from using a life insurance policy as a way to fund some of the gaps in the life plan, what are some other financial instruments, right, that others might consider without impacting SSI or SSDI, right? Would that be funded? Would you fund that through, or would that be part of a special needs trust? I'm not sure I'm asking the question the right way, but I mentioned earlier ABLE accounts, right?
Mm-hmm.
ABLE accounts are certainly one way to build wealth and allow your special needs loved one to use that down the line, and it doesn't have a negative impact on some of your benefits that you might, your son or daughter might be receiving. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, how does this impact any of these benefits?
Sure. So an ABLE account is it's a version of a 529. In fact, an ABLE account is actually called a 529-A. And the word able comes from achieving a better life experience.
I never knew that.
So that's what ABLE kind of stands for. It's, they love to put these little acronyms together. So what an ABLE account allows you to do is to put money away up to $16,000 contribution into an ABLE account per year. And just like a regular 529, when used for the purpose that it's intended, which in this case is for the beneficiary's best interest, right? And with the 529, it's very limited to education areas. With ABLE accounts, it's basically very broad. There's this thing that's called qualified disability expenses, or QDEs. So ABLE accounts are measured for their use. As long as it's a QDE, you can use the money for the best purposes of the beneficiary, which is your disabled loved one.
Sure.
The first $100,000 in an ABLE account is exempt from SSI's resource limit. So at that point, you could use an ABLE account if you're, let's just say that your child is, their representative payee account is accumulating relatively fast. And you would say, well, you know what, maybe I should put 100 or so, whatever your budget is. It could be 10, but whatever your budget is, put that into the ABLE account to help give that extra cushion. Now, the one thing I will say is that I usually do not use ABLE accounts for wealth building.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because, as many of us know, if we are using Medicaid, Medicaid keeps record of the care costs that they have provided for your child. And an ABLE account, because it is essentially considered money that is in the control of the beneficiary, which is your disabled loved one, Medicaid does have the ability, after your child passes, to make a claim on the funds that are in there. So I love to use ABLE accounts. I'm a big fan of ABLE accounts, but I like to use them more for goals rather than wealth building, right? So
sure.
Not that you can't build a lot of money, because some of these goals might be pretty expensive, but I like to build the growth for goals rather than for wealth building.
Sure. No, that makes perfect sense, Dennis. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned how we first met, how I first connected with you, and that was via your Facebook group, right? You want to talk a little bit about that? How did you start it? Why did you start it? And how are things going? And where would you like to take that group? I noticed the numbers membership keeps increasing, which is fantastic. So I think you're providing a lot of value to that group. Talk about that a little bit, if you could.
Thanks. That Facebook group is really important to me personally. It allows me to pour out the knowledge that I have to those that don't have it. I post into that group between 4 and 6 times a week. And a lot of times you'll see me post something and it says, I've been working with clients, or I've been working with somebody this week or recently on a particular thing. And one that was actually very, very just fortuitous. I was in one of my friends who has a disabled child of their own, and this person was talking about a mechanism for their child to still receive Medicaid benefits, even if the child is under 18 and the parents make too much for the child to qualify for SSI. But as you know, some of the treatments and some of the costs that could be covered by Medicaid, if you don't have Medicaid, those could be hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
So this person that I was working with, this mom, she actually talked about an insurance type of a mechanism that's run through the states, and it's only certain states, but most states have something similar called TEFRA. And basically it's a way for the state to forego looking at the parents' income and just use the child's circumstances just for the purposes of Medicaid, not for SSI. So what that allowed her to do is to obtain Medicaid for her child, which essentially saved her in this 1 month over $800.
Wow.
And that in itself inspired me to write a post about TEFRA. And it just so happened that that particular day, I was reaching out to someone that I was kind of like touching base with. They were introduced to me, and they weren't sure I could help them. And I just asked the question, so what is it that you're looking for? And she mentioned this exact same thing on the same day that I did the post.
Wow.
And we were like, you know what, let's work and let's find out if TEFRA might be able to get you back on track to where your child can get back on Medicaid. So it's little things like that, things that I may never have to experience in my lifetime, but may be very, very helpful to others that
Absolutely.
I wish someone had been able to give me that information when I was going through this, right? I want to provide that same information to other families. And I look at it as truly what goes around comes around. And I'm going to provide from my heart whatever I can for someone to help. And then hopefully in the end, it turns around and it becomes a benefit for me someday.
Yeah, no, Dennis, I think that's great. As we're talking here, right, and we mentioned earlier, everything that we bump into on a daily basis with some of our situations, it could be quite overwhelming. And to be able to turn to a support group, and these Facebook groups such as yours have been incredibly helpful, and sharing information that others can benefit from. I mean, that's truly a great service, and I'm glad you're giving back, and we appreciate that. So as I want to give you a few minutes here, if you would. I'd like you to do a little bit of a recap. If someone, what do you recommend as far as how to engage with someone, right? I mean, I mentioned your Facebook group here a few times. How would you recap your services and encourage someone in our audience to work with you?
So I appreciate that. So I do have the licensure, and I can work with folks in pretty much any state in the United States. If anyone wants to reach out to me to have a one-to-one conversation, I'll be happy to go through your individual circumstances and help you build a plan that's appropriate for you and your loved one. But if you feel that you need someone closer or someone different, I'll actually help you find the team members to help build your team. And I think there are several primary team members that you should engage. One being an attorney, and two, a financial advisor, financial planner of some sort. And I can't tell you how many times I work with families on figuring out the appropriate attorney for them, because what winds up happening is that attorneys are great, but not every attorney understands special needs planning. They just don't. So when I work with families, I always ask if it's possible that I speak with the attorney that they're working with. And I just ask them the basic questions about special needs planning, and if they feel they're comfortable doing it. And if not, would they recommend someone in their area that I could have this family work with? Or I'll go out and I'll find an attorney in the area where these families are directly and I'll connect them together. But I think you need at least a financial professional and you need an attorney. If your child is under 18, then I think that obviously having people in the educational aspect of the of your life, you need to have some people that are on your side, like IEP advocates or things like that. I know IEP advocates across the country that I can connect people with. So it's all about building your team and making sure that your team is working for the benefit of your child. And that's what I want to help do. And I would be honored and humbled if someone would want to ask me to be a member of the team. But my goal is to make sure that every family that can do it creates their team and builds their plan.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Dennis. Thank you. So I guess the best way, I would encourage the audience, if you're interested, find Dennis on Facebook, find his group, and tell him what you think, and follow the conversations there. I think you'll find them quite valuable. And then if you want to engage further, Dennis, I think you would instant message the individual or vice versa, and you'll be happy to speak with them, right?
Yeah.
Is that?
I'd be happy if you want to just direct message me from the Facebook group. That way we can make sure that all private and personal information is kept private and personal.
Yep, absolutely. That's important. So, well, look, I think we'll wrap this conversation up, and I just want to thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate what you're doing to give back to this special needs community. We can never have enough information. I say that all the time. And I personally need to hear things multiple times, right, in order for it to sink in for me. And so all of this information can be a bit overwhelming, as I've said a few times here. So thanks for keeping us, on track and helping this community, and hope to have you as a guest in the future here. Is there anything else that we may not have covered you'd like to talk about, Dennis? Otherwise, we'll start to wrap this thing up.
No, I could go forever, but the way I look at it is I've seen what you do in your area of providing help through technology. It's very, very important. So I appreciate what you do just as much. And, we all have a role to play, and, it's about getting the job done at the end of the day. So,
yeah, it takes a village, as they say, right? So,
yeah.
Now, thank you again, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. Take care, and we'll see you soon.